Hello, good morning, and another meditation on the hard sayings of the Bible. Most of them turn out to be hard sayings said by Jesus. And here's another one. No one can come to me unless the Father draws him. This is Jesus in John 6, the same chapter where we were looking at the last hard saying, the one where Jesus says we must eat him and drink him in the way we eat meat and drink wine. And of course that disgusted his first century Jewish audience tremendously. I don't think it disgusts us quite so much now. After all, we know that Jesus died on the cross, and we're used to the Christian ceremonial of sharing the Lord's Supper. But there's another saying in this passage which I think people probably find more disturbing now, and that is the one I've just mentioned. No one can come to me unless the Father draws him. Let me read from verse 43 of John 6. Stop grumbling among yourselves, Jesus answered. No one can come to me unless the Father who sent me draws them, and I will raise them up at the last day. It is written in the prophets, they will all be taught by God. Everyone who has heard the Father and learned from him comes to me. No one has seen the Father except the one who is from God. Only he has seen the Father. Now this saying, no one can come to me, seems to be one which denies human freedom fairly completely. No one can come to me. Well, there's an obvious irony here in that many thousands of people were, in one sense, coming to Jesus. It's just after the feeding of the 5,000, and all those thousands of people have come to Jesus from quite a long way. They've walked and run and so on to get there. Whenever Jesus turns up in a synagogue, the synagogue gets crowded out and people are standing and waiting outside. People are, in a sense, coming in crowds. They're travelling, they're pressing to come near him. But Jesus says, actually no one can come to me unless the Father draw him. He's saying that coming to Jesus in his sense is completely beyond our power. What he means by coming to him, of course, is believing on him, eating his flesh, drinking his blood, becoming a faithful disciple. No one can do that, he says. No one can come to Jesus in that sense on their own power. We're not free to come, and we're not free to believe, and we're not free to feed on him. In other words, redemption is impossible until God acts. And that's an annoying thing to be told. And Jesus is quite clear that this is the whole of God acting. He mentions the Father who draws us, and he says later on the Father enables us. It is the Holy Spirit who gives life, while our flesh achieves nothing. And it is the Son who gives life by speaking the words of life. So here is all of God, the three persons involved in doing for us what we cannot do for ourselves. The whole of God is involved in this matter of enabling us to come to Christ. Let me read a bit more. This is from verse 60. On hearing it, many of his disciples said, "This is a hard teaching. Who can accept it?" Aware that his disciples were grumbling about this, Jesus said to them, "Does this offend you? Then what if you see the Son of Man ascend to where he was before? The Spirit gives life, the flesh counts for nothing. The words I've spoken to you, they are full of the Spirit and life. Yet there are some of you who do not believe." For Jesus had known from the beginning which of them did not believe and who would betray him. He went on to say, "This is why I told you, no one can come to me unless the Father has enabled them." From this time on, many of his disciples turned back and no longer followed him. So it seems that this teaching caused offence back then, just as it still causes offence today. It is a hard saying. Why? Why is it hard to be told that only God can save us? Why is it hard to be told that redemption must be entirely God's work? Well, I think because, like those first century Jews, we also have been trained in a philosophy of free will. We tell people that they can choose to be born again. In fact, we have decision cards which are designed to do that very thing. You make the decision, God is bound to give you a new life. We tell people they're saved if they choose to be saved. We offer them a standardized prayer to get them to pray it so that they will, we tell them, certainly be saved. And we have a very shallow idea of what sin is. Quite often we talk about people sin simply because they choose to sin. It's all a matter of choosing to be a slave to sin because that was your choice or a series of choices. So everything really depends on our free will in that way of thinking. Our destiny is in our own hands. This is the theology of cooperation. We do our bit and God does his bit. We do our bit by making the right choices. God does his bit by taking away our guilt, giving us the Holy Spirit, and continuing to guard us from the evil one. So we choose and God chooses. Together we cooperate in our salvation. But Jesus doesn't use that language at all. He says the Spirit gives life. The flesh, that is you, counts for nothing. So why do we have a theology of free will, or a philosophy of free will, when it directly contradicts Jesus? Particularly the Jesus we find in John's Gospel, who is always telling us that everything in our salvation must be God's initiative. Right at the beginning, chapter 1, verse 11, he came to that which was his own, but his own did not receive him. Yet to all who did receive him, to those who believed in his name, he gave the right to become children of God. Children born not of natural descent, nor of human decision, nor a husband's will, but born of God. 3 ways that you might be born. Born of natural descent, born by a human decision, or born by a husband's will. No, you have to be born of God. Not your decision, not anyone's decision. Nicodemus comes to have a decent philosophical, theological chat with Jesus, which Jesus interrupts and tells him he can't even see the kingdom unless he's born again. Nicodemus says, well, how do I do that? And Jesus tells him that it's God's work. So in the Christian faith, we are not saved by exercising our freedom. Now, when I was a young man, I did exercise my freedom by avoiding God. I exercised my freedom by ignoring Christ. But then one day God exercised his freedom, and God freely drew me to Christ. So God made his choice first, and then I chose to follow him. First, we are saved by the will of the Father and by the work of Jesus, his body broken and his shed blood. And we are saved by the life of the Spirit being intertwined with our life. So we are saved by the Holy Trinity, Father, Son and Spirit. Secondly, that salvation leads to a certain amount of freedom. we are set free. The language of being set free in the Bible is always applied to the results of our salvation. We're not free to save ourselves. And then we exercise our freedom. Then we start living as the free children of God. And so, if we're going to say anything about free will, it must be that free will is a gift given by God as part of our salvation. And once we understand that, once we understand that there is such a thing as freedom, but it is the gift of God, then we will no longer talk about cooperating in our redemption, because that is only God's work. It may be a hard saying. No one can come to Jesus unless the Father who sent Jesus draws him. But it's absolutely true, and we should thank God that it is true. Well, I hope that makes sense. I hope that helps with that hard saying, and I'll bring another thought tomorrow. Bye for now.